the WASAG team, the Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture, which is part of the Land and Water Division of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. On behalf of the Government of the Netherlands, the FAO, the WASAG, the Global Soil Partnership, and the International Network on Salt-Affected Soils, the Wageningen University and Research, the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and all of our speakers, I would like to welcome you to our session titled Salinity and Climate Smart Agriculture, Understand, Connect, and Act Now. In this last session of the day, we will address the problem of salinity, a water scarcity and land degradation issue, which is increasingly becoming one of the important global challenges for food production and biodiversity. Our distinguished speakers will illustrate these challenges from different parts of the world and offer innovative solutions for sustainable water and soil management practices for adapting farming and food production systems to salinity. It is indeed important that we understand this issue, that we connect to make it an opportunity, and consequently, that we act now. While I will introduce the speakers when their turn to speak comes, let me tell you that they represent governments from the Global South and from the North, research institutions, civil society, and financial institutions and networks who are all actively addressing saline agriculture. I would particularly like to recognize the presence of His Excellency, Mr. Marcel Bukkeboom, the Dutch ambassador to the FAO, previously the Dutch Special Envoy for Climate, who will be closing our session today. But first, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Li-Feng Li, Director of the Land and Water Division of the FAO, who will deliver the keynote address of our session. Mr. Li, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Rome. I'd like to firstly recognize the commitment of the Ministry of Agriculture of the Netherlands and other co-conveners for this session, and in particular, Mrs. Schenker and other colleagues who are behind the scenes and brought all parties together for this session on salinity, a very important topic. The fact of having a dedicated full session on salinity and climate smart agriculture further confirms that it is indeed timely to understand, to connect, and to take required actions. We expect from our distinguished speakers the insight not only into the challenges, but also into the opportunities of managing and coping with the salinity to achieve food security, while protecting our natural resources base, which is rested primarily on water, land, and soils. We are aware that water salinity is one of the major causes of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, affecting agricultural production and making society more vulnerable to climate and non-climate risks. From the last 25 years, averagely every day, 2,000 hectares of arable land have been degraded by salt. Salinity intrusion will continue also to increase with the rising sea levels, especially threatening small island states such as Cape Verde, from whom we will be here just shortly. Thus, the actions required will rely on the good knowledge on salinity, its causes, its patterns, its trends, where and which concerted actions are required. This is why a world soil salinity map will be shown in the video by the International Network of the Salinity Affected Soils of the Global Soil Partnership. It's very timely. The guidance developed by the members of the WASAG working group on saline agriculture led by ICPA will help countries further transform salinity into an opportunity for sustainable agriculture, especially if we focus on high-value crops for income generation. Quinoa is one of such crops that has the potential to thrive in saline environment. All these actions will support climate-smart agriculture in the context of salinity. This session will further strengthen the work of these collaborative networks and connect the dots between the global south, the north, the private sector, researchers, and civil societies, as well as financial institutions such as the Asian Development Bank. We need to further agree on a way forward on how to accelerate the actions that are emerging from this engagement and further support them from each partner's comparative advantages. We need to hear from our panelists how to scale up the proven solutions and how to develop the necessary enabling environment. From the Food and Agriculture Organization, we confirm our continued commitment as already expressed by the partnership, such as Global Soil Partnership and WASAC, that the Land and Water Division hosts, but also through our own technical divisions who collaborate and the FAO Task Force on Sea Land Agriculture, which is also hosted by the Division of the Land and Water. The expectations on this session are high, not only from countries such as Cape Verde and also other countries that are facing salinity challenges, such as those around the RRC and many coastal countries. Dear distinguished panelists, I thank you again, and together we will participate with all the participants connected to this session. We look forward to your contributions. I thank His Excellency Ambassador Marcel Birkboom, who at the end of this session will deliver the conclusion messages to send us home to take the required actions. To all participants, I thank you for following this session, and I believe that you will benefit from this session in order to better understand, to connect, and mostly to act as informed role players to manage salinity for food security and nutrition and for other ecosystem services. I wish you all a very fruitful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for this pertinent message, which sets the tone to our session. We will now move to a video on the World Soil Salinity Map by the International Network of Salt-Affected Soils of the Global Soil Partnership. So, Rachel, if you would like to play the video for us, it's the Salt-Affected Soils video.
Salt-affected soils include both saline and sodic soils. Saline soils contain an excessive amount of soluble salts. The presence of soluble salt makes it difficult for plants to absorb water from the soil. Sodic soils carry high amounts of absorbed sodium ions that damage soil structure. Soils become hard and compact when dry and sticky when wet. Both saline and sodic conditions considerably reduce the agricultural productivity. Over 833 million hectares are salt-affected soils. The map currently covers 73% of the global land area. What are the drivers of salt-affected soils? There are natural and human-induced saline and sodic soils. In arid, semi-arid, and coastal environments, saline and sodic soils are naturally present. These soils are not degraded, but typical of these landscapes, where halophytic vegetation is present. The Uyuni Salt Flat in Bolivia is an example of this type of landscape and soil. All the saline soils surrounding the lake are used to produce crops, particularly the quinoa reel, which is a very nutritious crop. These soils also produce natural vegetation eaten by camelids. Human-induced salinization and sodification. The main drivers are unsustainable agricultural practices, irrigation with poor quality water, removal of deep-rooted vegetation resulting on raised water table, water pumping at the coastal plains, overuse of fertilizers. Because of climate change, soils at coastal areas are facing seawater intrusion, causing salinity and sodicity. What can we do? Conserve natural ecosystems prone to salinity and sodicity. Manage soils and water sustainably. Apply appropriate irrigation practices and adapted crops. Manage salt-affected soils in harmony with nature. Let's work together to halt soil salinization and boost soil productivity.
Thank you, Rachel. So this video here on salt-affected soils and sodic soils brings us to the core of our topic. And the map presented is needed to guide the decision that we have to make. I would like now to welcome Dr. Angela Moreno of the National Institute for Agriculture Research and Development, INIDA, of the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment of the Government of Cabo Verde. Dr. Moreno, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Angela. I'm from Cabo Verde. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this COP26. Cabo Verde is a state of small islands, development seats, fragile in the face of the impact of extreme weather events. The average annual rainfall is about 200 millimeters, and the extreme and severe droughts have accompanied Cabo Verde for centuries. However, in recent years, the country has been facing unprecedented droughts, aggravated by saline intrusion, soil degradation, and the loss of irrigation water quality, which altogether severely affect agricultural production in this country. Cabo Verde's ambitions is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. By 2030, Cabo Verde intends to establish resilient functions and key metrics, namely concerning to low carbon, gender and disaster sensitive water access, energy and the essential utilities, and the resilience infrastructure and equipments. The Ministry of Agriculture and Environment is making a huge effort to maximize the technical and scientific options available nationally and internationally, including biodiversity in agriculture, groundwater, brackish water desalination, wastewater treatment, drip irrigation, and soil and water salinity mapping. We need to find innovative solutions, not only for drinking water, but also for agriculture, which means that soil and water salinity needs to be managed, starting with a good knowledge of our soils and water resources. The challenge imposed by current climate phenomena have become an opportunity to identify integrated and alternative solutions for water management in agriculture in Cabo Verde. Such solutions include non-conventional sources of water and energy, soil and water management, good agronomic practices, other transversal interventions such as socio-environmental aspect, capacity building, investment, and public and private partnerships. For the development of biodiversity in agriculture, the cultivation of halophytes and algae are great opportunities in Cabo Verde. We welcome the effective collaboration that we have been developing with some partners who bring together their knowledge and expertise to support us, namely WASAG, the collaboration with Italy, with ICBA, with FAO, among other partners. We also welcome the development of soil salinity map and the upcoming collaborations on the halophytes plant and salt-tolerant crop within our corporations. We were open for further collaborations because you believe that the combination of interventions which bring together expertise from the different parts of the world will increase the possibility to extend the success in provision and access to the safe drink water, sustainable agricultural production, and food and nutrition security in Cabo Verde. Thus, we conclude with optimism and we hope to attract more partners to invest in such opportunities to transform Cape Verde in the really resilient country. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Moreno, for your intervention and for this open invitation from Cabo Verde. Our next speaker is Professor and Dr. Salim Haq, Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development. He was not able, unfortunately, to join us today in live, but he has sent us a message about salinity. Rachel, if you would like to play Mr. Salimul Haq message. Rachel, do you receive?
Hello, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University, Bangladesh. And I'm pleased to be able to talk to you. Unfortunately, I'm not able to join you in person, so I'll share some of my thoughts on particularly the problems of salinity in the low-lying coastal zone of Bangladesh, which we are already facing. But salinity intrusion, both in the surface water, in the drinking water, and in the groundwater, is a complex phenomena. It is not easy to attribute it to anything in particular, although a combination of low flows, particularly in the Ganges River, in the southwestern part of the country, as well as sea level rise, is likely to be the cause of it. The phenomenon is happening. We know that. We can see it. We can measure it. The salinity in levels are increasing. If you and I were to visit coastal zone of Bangladesh and drink the water that the local people there are drinking, you and I will feel it salty. And so that is a reality. For most human beings, a little bit of salt we can tolerate, but some people can't, particularly pregnant women. Pregnant women, if they drink salty water, get hypertension, high blood pressure, that then leads to preeclampsia at childbirth. And this has been very well documented that it is already happening. So we are seeing the effects of salinity intrusion, particularly in drinking water. Similarly, we are also seeing this in agriculture sector. Fortunately for Bangladesh, our rice research scientists and other researchers, agriculture researchers, have come up with a wide variety of salt-tolerant varieties of rice, which are now grown in millions of hectares by millions of farmers. But unfortunately, salinity levels are increasing faster than the plant breeders can produce varieties of rice that can tolerate salinity levels. And so at some point, rice cannot be grown anymore. They have to switch to a more saline utilizing crop, and that happens to be shrimp farming or crab farming in some cases, and large parts of the coastal area are being converted to shrimp. Although there are certain disbenefits with converting paddy or rice land to shrimp farming, because the ecosystem gets destroyed. There are significant disbenefits to local people because shrimp farming requires large areas of land that rich people can afford to do, but poor people can't afford to do. So there are a number of complications in the story of low-lying coastal zones around the world, but in Bangladesh in particular. And it's extremely important that we do good quality research to first find out what the problems are, second, find out what the solutions to those problems might be, and how solutions also need to evolve over time, because there's never one single solution to everything. So we need to be in an active research learning by doing modality, researchers working with farmers, working with local people, collectively producing new knowledge, co-benefiting all the people involved, and ensuring that Bangladesh's people can adapt effectively to the impacts of climate change, particularly salinity in the low-lying coastal zone of the country.
I would like to thank Professor Salimul Haq for his message. I think it gives us a good idea of the complex situation in which Bangladesh is and what is to do in the future to find integrated solutions at all levels. Next, I would like to present Dr. Tarifa El-Zabi, Acting Director General of ICBA, the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, which is an international non-profit applied agricultural research center. ICBA leads the WASAG Working Group on Saline Agriculture.
Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm delighted to be here and listening to all those ideas and projects that we all share the passion for and the challenges as well. Today, agriculture and food production face many challenges and constraints, from water scarcity to soil and water salinization to climate change. According to research, 1.128 billion hectares of land is affected by salinity, which is an alarming issues that we need to focus on. Another major issue is brine, a byproduct from desalination. In 2018, it was estimated 15,900 desalination plants providing around 95 million cubic meters of desalinated water for human use every day, of which 48% is provided and produced in Middle East and North Africa region, which is a major challenge. As such, brine is costly to be disposed, as well as it has a negative impact on the environment. It's a real challenge that we need to find solutions around that to be best utilized. Equipped with that, climate change and the growing population are also threatening our food production system, clipped with the challenges with salinity and the environment. Therefore, it is more important than before that we need to increase the productivity and utilization of land, water resources degraded by salinization and other factors to meet food demand. Saline water and other unconventional sources of water, we need to focus on how can we utilize them to grow different and alternative crops and to ensure that we are providing food, feed, and biofuel. Through the research conducted in ICBA, and of course through the collaboration with different research centers that are present with us today, we are working together to improve the agriculture production and ecosystem resilience on salt-affected lands through cultivating on forgotten and unutilized plants. We're talking about quinoa, we're talking about pearl millet and fox millet, different crops that are already stress resilient to different type in the climate, especially heat, drought, and salinity. And also we are focusing on halophytes. Again, it's something if we start to adjust them and embed them in our food system, we will be coming up with different solutions that are friendly for the environment and for the salinities issues we are focusing on. ICBA has a gene bank, which is a home to the largest collection of germplasm of salt, heat, and drought tolerance. 14,524 accessions of around 270 plant species from more than 150 countries. How can we really work better to ensure that those type of crops are being utilized and being used and implemented? Finally, I would like to conclude that ICBA operates in land and coastal integrated agriculture systems in order to ensure that the potential of reject brine and seawater for food production. The inland system used desalinated water for vegetable, reject brine for fish, and aquaculture effluents for halophytic plants, while coastal system uses seawater for fish and aquaculture effluents for halophytic plants. This model showcased currently at Expo 2020 Dubai, and all what we need to do is to learn from each other, ensure the best practices in place, and ensure the know-how are also transferred to our farmers in a very applicable and pragmatic way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alzabi, for your intervention. I think it gives us an idea of the plant crops that can be used and the model that can be put in place. We now welcome Dr. Bos Bruning from the Salt Doctors, which is a social enterprise from the Netherlands that specializes in improving crop yield under saline conditions by research, consultancy, and providing practical training in the field.
Thank you very much. Yes, so as we've seen in the previous talks, as we've heard, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of scientific research happening all over the world. There are many research groups working on salinity. They are developing excellent knowledge on the salinity effects on crops, on soils, and also the socio-economic detrimental effects of a salinizing world. Also, symposia are organized just on salinity. And our current session is an example of the good attention that goes to the issue of salinity. However, all those latest insights don't always reach the farmers or extension officers and agricultural consultants that actually need those. And so in here, during these few minutes, I want to show a few examples of what is still achievable when you do provide those solutions that are being developed all over the world by successful groups, if you provide them to the people that can most use them. Because my experience has shown time and again on projects on different continents with different types of climates, different types of salinity problems, that considerable improvements in yields are achievable. So, for example, to start at the lower end of some of the experiences that we have, was a 25% yield increase on salt-affected soils on an organic farm here in Egypt, using salt-tolerant potatoes and a high level of compost. Another example also involving potatoes was in Pakistan, where we improved yields by more than 40% by using salt-tolerant varieties. Additionally to that, we also saved fresh water. 50% of fresh water was saved compared to the conventional farming techniques in Pakistan. And then at the higher end of achievements is an almost doubling in yield, a 96% yield increase that we achieved in Kenya using salt-tolerant carrots. And also in this project, we achieved also a water saving using better irrigation techniques. Finally, a bit of a bigger project to use as an example. This was in Bangladesh. We heard from the speaker before that the problems are large there. We implemented a project there, and this was assessed according to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then it shows that using saline agriculture, salt-adapted farming techniques can help to address several Sustainable Development Goals. For example, with our project, new land can be used for crop cultivation, which was previously not used. And this relates to SDG 2, zero hunger. At the same time, it also improves vegetable consumption for those involved, which contributes to SDG 3, good health and well-being. Additionally to that, it increased food security and the income for the households. So this relates to both SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, and also SDG 3, good health and well-being. And since in this project, women were also actively involved in the project, their skills and participation in the project increased greatly. And this relates to SDG 5, so gender equality. And finally, this project was a clear example of climate action, which is SDG 13, and setting up public-private partnerships, taking into account everybody that was involved in that project. And that is a direct link to SDG 17 to reach the goals. So these are just a few examples of what can be achieved if you give the right solutions to the right people. And we believe that these success stories need to be shown in a broader context. because this type of demonstrations can really help to convince farmers to adapt their farming strategies, but also in policymakers and perhaps investors. At the same time, these locations can be used for further developing practical solutions to local salinity problems, adapted to the local climate, to the local specific salinity problems. In order for us to learn in the longer term what type of solutions is sustainable. Sustainability is a critical thing when you're dealing with salinity. So when we have enough of those demonstration sites in place, when enough people can come and visit those and see with their own eyes what the possibilities are on a salt-affected planet, we can continue to develop our understanding of salinity and improving, but hopefully we can also convince people, those that are in charge of this, that we need to upscale this. We need these demonstration places to see what is possible, and then hopefully we can seriously start upscaling the salt-adapted farming techniques. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruning. It shows us not only that the research is important, but also the application of that knowledge on the field. And I think the examples that you gave us today highlight that matter. And we hope to have many successful stories, like you mentioned. We will now move to our next speaker, Mr. Stefan Kithuka, Head of Programs of Solidaridad in Eastern and Central Africa. Solidaridad is an international civil society organization that develops solutions to make communities more resilient.
Thank you. Just speaking from where the previous speakers have reached so far, in order to attain speed and scale in implementation of these solutions and innovative practices that other speakers have already talked about, we need to involve and build the capacity of big numbers of producers, putting more emphasis on soil health, biodiversity, issues touching on for surface management, and also value chain development. And again, to ensure sustainability and inclusivity in all this work, mainstream development is critical in order to generate or foster employment opportunities, and also improve working conditions, and also create the much needed empowerment. Again, in order to guarantee this sustainability and inclusivity, we also need to build on supportive business ecosystems to ensure producers have access to finance, have access to products and other necessary services, and to also ensure that the ownership within the value chain is also improved for these producers, which at the end of it means more income or more returns for these producers. And lastly, we need to develop enabling policy environment that ensures that we have a responsible private sector that implements comprehensive policies and business models that benefit these producers. And lastly, at the same time, also ensure we have a supportive a public sector that implements and enforces existing frameworks or policies, and also a supportive public sector that is willing to develop new guidelines and frameworks, and all is willing to adopt new sustainability norms. So in order, if we do this, we are saying we are trying to create an environment whereby we are trying to pull in other partners in order to come and support this process of working along ensuring that saline agriculture improves the livelihoods of many producers in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kithuka. It shows us the importance to implement different supportive ecosystems clearly. Our next speaker is Mr. Yele Bekma, Senior Water Resources Specialist in Food Security at the Asian Development Bank, which is a financial institution that works towards a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific, while sustaining its efforts to eradicate extreme poverty in the region. Over to you, Mr. Bekma.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to the organizers to invite me to this excellent and very, very fascinating session with a lot of importance, I think. And I think we cannot overstate that, particularly taking into consideration all the different mechanisms that you have for salinization in terms of climate change. We're looking at increasing resilience and improving the efficiency of irrigation, and we go for drip irrigation. And like we saw in the first movie, one of the issues is often related to our irrigation system. And if we increase efficiency, more salts are left behind because less is leached. Then there are the mechanisms, of course, where we're using groundwater and where we have the saline groundwater that is upconing. And that is happening more and more in areas, for example, where the tail end doesn't receive sufficient water. And a third one is what we're all very concerned about and what we heard already from Bangladesh and from Cabo Verde, as well as the sea level rise related to climate change and the coastal areas that are suffering from saline water intrusion. So at the same time, there's a lot of different mechanisms that contribute to an increasing problem of salinity. And the only way we can really address this is of course, through inclusion of the scientific information, inclusion of the practical demonstrations into standards, into policy documents that are quite often related at different at a national level. So we have these different mechanisms, we have different ways of addressing it, and sometimes also to the specific scheme. So they're very localized. So from, let's say, science towards practical implementation and proven concepts, we need to develop policies and we need to develop specific guidelines that are important for projects. Inside an organization as ours, the Asian Development Bank and other financing institutions, of course, we need also guidelines on how to deal with salinity that are more broad, because every country has its own policies and particularly, like we said before, also it's quite localized. Every system has own ways to address it as well. For example, in the Murray-Darling Basin, there's a specific policy over there that is not encompassing the whole of Australia. We have the Colorado River, where we have a specific salinity management committee that meets regularly. So one of the really important messages I want to give is that no matter what we do, even if we have very saline resistant crops, we can increase the salinity of the water, we can decrease the amount of leaching, but we still need to maintain a balance. Because if the salinity keeps on increasing, eventually we run into problems and we need to install a higher density of drainage system, we need to do more investments, and we're actually back at the same problem or even worse. So one of the main principles that we need in policies and in guidelines is maintaining an equilibrium at a certain level, no matter, even if we have more saline adjusted type of crops. I want to keep it to that. We're certainly developing on this together with our developing member countries in the country partnership strategies, as well as in specific projects more localized. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to continue to cooperate with you on practical implementation of salinity control.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bekma. for highlighting the importance of maintaining the equilibrium in the building policies and developing guidelines process. So after these enlightening and rich views from our speakers, I have the pleasure of welcoming His Excellency, Mr. Marcel Bokkebom, the Dutch Ambassador, Permanent Representative to the FAO. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you to all the speakers for their contributions the past hour. I'm happy to be virtually present in the Water Pavilion, and as the former climate envoy, you mentioned it, of the Netherlands, I do miss the COP, of course. But at the same time, it's good to notice that you can still follow it from a distance. Climate reporting has become central to, I think, all serious media these days. Some criticize COPs for being mere talk shops, a lot of blah, blah, blah. Of course, there are many hollow promises and empty gestures. And one should be critical about that and keep on pushing for concrete action and results on the ground. There's another side to COPs though, and as a regular guest, I can say that side has been growing over the years. This is the COP of sharing concrete examples from countries around the globe, of learning from each other, forging new partnerships. That side of the COP is a breeding place of good ideas and ultimately also of inspiration and hope. Today's session in the Water Pavilion is a good example of this side of the COP. I'm honored to be here to share a few closing remarks with you. Listening to Angela Moreno from Cabo Verde and to Salim Al-Hook from Bangladesh, I realized once more that climate change is a great equalizer. It affects us all, no matter where you are. At the same time, it magnifies inequalities. The capacity we have to respond to climate change greatly differs depending on where you were born. Historically, countries with a long coastline, a river delta, or a lot of fresh water have an advantage, for example, in their abilities to produce food and bring it to markets. With climate change accelerating, these geographical advantages could quickly become a disadvantage, not only because of more extreme weather, but also because of rising sea levels and the topic of our session today. And if climate change wasn't enough, we, humans, have exacerbated the problem by unsustainable agricultural practices. We have seen the examples in the opening video. The man-made nature of the climate crisis, the very reason we are in Glasgow, and these agricultural practices also lead us to the conclusion that we can actually do something about it. It implies that we have to change. But how? Some of these practices have been passed on for generations, brought us higher crop yields, reducing global hunger and bringing economic development to many parts of the world. Today's speakers have given us answers to that question of how we can change. I pick out a few of their points. First, the importance of an integrated approach. This applies at ground level, where water, soil, and crop-related practices need to be combined. But also at systems level, we need to zoom out and combine different agendas. Indeed, the Sustainable Development Goals, and recently added also the Food System Summit approach, not addressing them side by side, those SDGs, but all at the same time. Food is the connector of all SDGs. Second, the importance of knowledge. For this, we need to foster research, share its results, and be open to learn from each other. We also have to realize solutions don't have to be high-tech. The soil salinity map, as presented today, helps informed decision-making. Sometimes small adjustments to existing practices already make a big difference. Important to realize, also in light of the inequalities I mentioned in the beginning. Third, the importance of international collaboration. Of course, as a diplomat whose bread and butter is international cooperation, I cannot say otherwise. At the same time, with more than 20 years of experience in this field, I can attest firsthand of the added value of international collaboration. Thank you, FAO, Solidaridad, ADB, and the others for your invaluable contribution to this. Where climate change doesn't know borders, our solutions shouldn't either. Finally, becoming practical is what we need. Looking for the added value, share, break down silos, and just keep on going. Thank you all today for that. Thank you for being with us today at this inspiring and interesting event. And just keep on doing what you did today. Talk about your work, share it, and just march forward. Thank you all. Back to you.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. This is Rachel from the Water Pavilion here in Glasgow. We've all been listening to you. Now, we hope you'll stay on for 4 more minutes of your time, because we have Saxon here who would like to ask you all a question. Marcel, we see you smiling, but we also welcome everybody else joining there. I'm passing this over to Saxon now.
Hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for the talk. I am making a documentary series about the Aral Sea, so of course this subject was fascinating for me, and salinity is a key part of this story. I wanted to ask, it might seem quite a specific question, but there were quite a lot of references to saline agriculture. And I wanted to ask a question about Artemia, otherwise known as brine shrimp. So upon spending time in the region of the Aral Sea in the last year, it was a discovery of ours that you actually have thousands of people in the region being employed by the Artemia cultivation or harvesting industry, which has only just recently emerged. And I was told by a local business person that it's actually the biggest contributor of jobs in the region following the loss of the fishing industry. So I wanted to ask, basically, what are the general thoughts on the potential of Artemia for those that perhaps can comment, and might it offer an opportunity to other communities around the world that might either now be suffering or will be suffering in the future from water salinification? So I'll pass that question on to anyone who would like to address it, and thanks again.
Thank you. Over to you.
Is anyone going for the answer to that question?
Well, I would like to, I don't, of course, know the specifics of the example, but to me it illustrates a broader point, and that is that we as humans are able to adapt to those changing circumstances, also use the effects of climate change and perhaps also of man-made disasters, because that is what the Aral Sea is as well, to create something new. And that is inspirational, I would say. At the same time, we should not forget what is happening in that area, and that we should also address the natural disaster that is taking place. But it's indeed a good example. So thank you for sharing it. I didn't know it. So keep on learning.
Are we still here? Mr. Lee, you wanted to
say just to contribute some of those, Aral Sea has been widely used as one of the examples that's happened in just the last few decades. And the disappearance of the Aral Sea, that's important lesson we could learn. And also we're very glad to see, in fact, the Civil Aral Sea Foundation has been set up, by all the riparian countries to really work together and realize the important lessons, but also build the trust, share the knowledge, share the data, and then start to look at what would be the solutions. In fact, during the symposium on salt-affected soils that's hosted by Uzbekistan, we already know some of the good practice in terms of dealing with saline soil in that region. That's a good practice already being started to be implemented by those countries. It is one of the examples we have to learn the lessons that we can act upon, and then be able to live much better water security for the generations to come. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
And thank you, Nasili. Thank you for the team. This has been a fascinating day. We here at the Water Pavilion have been looking at agriculture and food. We know there are siloed areas, but we've all been working together here. We started with social inclusion this morning and gender, and we have gone through adaptation, mitigation, a high level. We've looked at nutrition, we've looked at aquatic food systems, and we have finished out in salinity. So thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been a wonderful tour of agriculture and food in water, and thank you very much from the Water Pavilion, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.